Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CBI's SME webinar on this beautiful Thursday morning. Hope you are all well, and it is beautiful where you are too. For those of you I've yet to meet, my name is Deborah Fraser and I'm Director for Regions here at the CBI. Now, today's session, we're looking at innovation in challenging times, and I'm delighted that we're joined by three very esteemed guests. We've got Ben Griffin from Innovate UK, we've got Jeremy James, who's the Managing Partner of Ownet, and we've got Dan Watson, who's from Safety Net Technology. The format of today will be as normal. We'll hear from each of our speakers in turn, apart from I think I've just read them out completely in the different order to how we'll hear from them. Then we'll open things up to Q&A. We've got the question box, so please go to the question box, type in your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them because we've just run out of time, we will give our panelists homework, and we will come back to you on a one-to-one basis with their answers to their questions. But first up, we're going to have Jeremy James, and Jeremy is going to be discussing his own experiences of leading an SME to innovate, but also his experiences of working with clients and what he's seeing in terms of good practice in terms of thinking about innovation. So I will pop myself onto mute, and Jeremy, hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Good morning, everybody. As Deborah mentioned, I'm the managing partner for a consulting firm called Ownet. We are a reasonably young firm, started up in 2016, and our focus is on helping clients to transform and ensure assurance within their businesses. We are predominantly UK-led. We have just recently opened a presence in India as well. Now, for us, design-led innovation is really part of our DNA and drives our solutions for our clients. And I thought the best way to sort of demonstrate this was to use a couple of examples. The first being is, from really our setup of Ownet itself and how we run our business at the moment. So within that, when previous to setting up Ownet, I used to run the UK practice for a global consulting firm. And from that, I was obviously, open to seeing what the problems were, but what were the great things that we were doing within that organization and also the broader sector. So when looking to set up Ownet, we first of all looked at what was our core aim. And, that was pretty easy for us as defining what that was, which was making our clients successful. And so what we wanted to do was to ensure that all of our structures, everything that we put in place, drove that goal and that deliverable to our clients. So what we went through was very much a design-led, innovative approach to drive the way that we wanted the organization to be. And that came down to identifying what our the core problems and the core opportunities that we saw within the consulting space, and then looking through other industries and trying to take innovative ideas and learnings from those industries and other businesses. So this included, some of the disruptive businesses such as the low-cost airline carriers, but also, strong sporting teams like the All Blacks and how they worked, how they stayed top of their game all the time. Looking at, some of the innovative businesses within the UK, such as the John Lewis partnership, and bringing all of these together and then going out and doing some client research. And for us, that was absolutely core, was really taking to those clients and understanding what is important and what was frustrations for them when they were engaging consultants. And we pulled all of that together, applied the innovative ideas that we were taking from other sectors, plus our experience of consulting, and then ensured that we could build the structures within the organization that addressed each of those important factors and those frustrations that clients were articulating. And to do that, we actually mapped out all of those customer journeys of how we were going to bring that together. And ultimately, that has resulted in I believe, still in the 4 years, unique consulting model that is very innovative and truly does drive the success for our clients. And we measure that on an ongoing basis with our clients through asking them for feedback at the end of each of our programs of work. And that feedback delivers directly to the compensation of our consultants, as well as helping them to grow their ownership stake in the business, which is hence the name OwnNet. It's a network of owners. We work very much in a cooperative manner with a very flat organization. So for me, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we've achieved, or even be able to set up a different type of consulting firm without having that human-centric and design-led approach in going into this. If we had tried to do this in a bubble on our own, we would have very much have been limited to our own experiences. So the second example that I wanted to give is how we actually help our clients to de-risk digital transformation. I'm sure everybody is hearing about digital transformation, whether that be through RPA, building of bespoke systems, plug and play solutions. And the trouble with digital transformation is it does take quite a bit of investment, and it does have high failure rates. If you look in some of the studies, you'll see up as high as 85% failure rates. But that does not mean that it's not worth going on the journey of innovating and looking at moving into the digital space and automating where you can. And there really isn't a choice. Organizations that do innovate will take a lead, and there is therefore the need to de-risk that that journey going through that. So what we've worked with clients on, from multiple different sectors and different sizes of organizations, is how to build the frameworks to ensure that you de-risk that journey through the digital transformation. And that goes from, at the most simple level of building frameworks that give the ability for people to step through what needs to be done, how to pull in the right tools at the right time to drive that innovation, and to keep it very focused and try to keep the investment focused and limited to what is actually adding value within that transformation. And that then all moves through to using technology to also drive some of that. So we've been working with clients on building digital twins of an organization. And what that really is building a virtual presence of your organization that stays in sync with your day-to-day work. And by doing that, people are able to identify, one, where their baseline is, two, as they move through and they create the design of their new world, they're able to test it in the virtual environment before putting it out into the real world with their customers, with their staff, and other stakeholders. And that way we're de-risking, and then that can then stay within their organization for ongoing conformance and ongoing improvement. So there's just a couple of areas that, we've really helped, I think, clients focus and helped ourselves to be, where we are today. And all of these structures, really do enable, more timely, accurate decision making. It reduces the disruption of change and the cost of change. And as I said, it de-risks that change and innovation. And all those solutions, and one thing which I would say is very key here, when you're looking at going through any change and you're designing how you're going to innovate, it has to be customized to your environment, to your organization, and making sure that it fits for what your need is at the time and the environment you live in. So I think at that, I probably should hand back to Deborah and look forward to answering any questions afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. That was fascinating, and I think people keep putting your questions into the chat box because I think there's a lot of input that Jeremy can offer. Right, second up we have Dan Watson, who's from Safety Net Technology, who's fascinating company that builds and designs devices to support the selectivity in commercial fishing. So in layman's terms, Dan, feel free to correct me. That's trying to avoid baby fish and certain fish. Now, Dan is going to be discussing his own experiences of using design-led innovation to achieve solutions and putting new practices into operation. So, Dan, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, I have some slides to back up some of the points I'm going to try and make this morning. And yeah, the point about sort of designing human-centered stuff is super interesting. And Jeremy, thanks for all the points that you made about innovation and being able to de-risk things as well. So I'll start, I guess, with the basic question of what is design, and it covers a whole range of different things. We're not going to obviously go into all of them today because there's so much to cover, but you would see this in your everyday lives if it's fashion design, automotive, shoes, all sorts of things. And even graphic design, which, as you'll see from the rest of my slides, is not my personal qualification. Mine is much more focused on the human-centered side of things and understanding end user needs. So next slide, please. And essentially, we sort of break it down into the ways that we can identify those user needs to really generate and build things that answer specific problems that people have. So for us, for instance, and I'll come into this in a second, like we work in the commercial fishing sector. So what are the real problems plaguing the fishing sector? You'll know some of this already in your companies because you work closely with the sector. And it's a way of essentially doing that research, looking out into the world, into these big, messy industries and sectors we're working with, and trying to pull out some interesting points about, okay, where are these real issues lying? Then speaking with those end users and sort of putting things out there that people can really understand. So Deborah, thank you for breaking down what we do into layman's terms, because that's kind of what we try to do when we work with end users. It's like, here's a thing you can look at and understand and respond to, which helps us as a company actually build a thing that solves a real problem that you might have. And where that sort of puts us as a company is we're trying to find this happy spot in the middle of technology, so the feasibility. Can we actually build this thing? Having identified a business problem that will actually identify and create value for a particular sector or a person. And what are the human values associated with that? So like, what do people actually need for this to be feasible and successful? And the human-centered design process is a way for us to start identifying this. And even once we've identified and sort of released that solution into the world, continuing to check up and measure and see if it's having the desired change and actually enabling people to change their behavioral practices or the effect they're having on the world around them. Next slide, please. So the way that we do that safety net is, as mentioned, is we're addressing the issue of bycatch and catching the wrong fish in the commercial fishing sector. And we built this product called Pisces, which is a light emitting device, which essentially acts like an emergency escape sign and attracts and repels different species from fishing nets. So this started off 10 years ago, going out on fishing vessels, talking to scientists, talking to policymakers to understand the scope of the problem and where we could really make a change. And it's carried on through speaking with the fishing sector as we've developed technology to make sure that it is attuned with how people work on fishing boats. And what you can see there is how it's been deployed in fishing gears and what the effect can be. So this 90% bycatch reduction. And now we've come to a point where we're deploying this as hardware as a service because that's the way that the fishing sector needed it to work. And it meant that we can actually get data back and keep tuning our own models to keep that working too. Next slide, please. And the way that we continue to do that is we talk with stakeholders across the whole fishing supply chain, right? So we speak with people in small scale fishing boats, big industrial fishing boats, the policymakers. We go out into the field and see how people work, capture all this information through different tools and use that to answer questions that we have about how we make strategic decisions as a company for our own business. Next slide, please. And what that can look like is a couple of examples. So this was actually a GCRF Innovate UK funded project called ACHIC, where we went to Peru to look at small-scale fisheries to see if our current high-end industrial technology could scale to solving problems in the small-scale sector there around catching the right fish. Now, this was sort of offset cost-wise by Innovate UK. We had, I think it was a £60,000 grant to go and do some feasibility studies. And through that user-centered process and going out and speaking with all the communities involved, we could map it out and actually make decisions around whether it made sense for us to go and scale up our work in that sector. It turned out actually right now is not the time to do it, but we were able to find out pretty conclusively that that made sense, even though there was the prospect of a £500,000 grant where we were able to then take it forward as a project. It didn't make sense. It wasn't going to have a long-term payoff for us. On the flip side, and on the next slide, we had another project called Smes, which was looking around fishing data, and would that have value to different stakeholders working around the ocean space, and what could we learn? And we used another grant to sort of hire a designer or a couple of designers to interact with the stakeholder community, get data from them, build some prototypes and mock-ups to run past those end users, and really find out whether or not, in a very cheap way, essentially, this would actually solve their problem before we invested a lot more money, because we know this is going to cost us like a few £1,000,000 to go and do properly over the next 2 or 3 years before we can even commercialize it. So if people then turn around and they're like, even if you build me something that looks like that and does that thing, it's not going to add value to me. That helps us to know that, even if there is a case there of like Ford's thing of, if you ask people what they want, they'll say faster horses, right? But it's a way of having that conversation in a structured way and knowing what the upside is and what the potential downside is before you make that huge leap. So that's what we've done so far in terms of design. I think that's my 5 minutes, so looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dan. We've got questions coming in, but I think we'll wait till we've heard from Ben, and then we'll open things up properly. So, Ben from Innovate UK, Ben's going to give us a bit of an overview of Innovate UK, best practice that he's seeing, own experiences of firms that innovating, and hopefully a little bit of an overview as to funding. So, Rich, hopefully you might get some of your questions answered, because Rich, somebody's made a point in the chat box that SMEs and businesses are kind of debted out, so interested in particular in grants, not loans. Okay, Ben, so over to you.
Thank you. So 5 minutes. The world needs great ideas, right? We're facing some pretty big challenges right now, not only as businesses but also as human beings. We need to find sustainable ways to support a high quality of life on this planet. That means that we need to change. It also means that the companies that we rely on need to develop new products, services, and business models to support that change. And for those that do, the opportunities to prosper and grow are significant. So innovation is vital and it's valuable, but you've probably also heard that innovation is about taking risks, it's about embracing uncertainty, and it's about being comfortable with failure. Well, if I was running an SME with all of the day-to-day challenges and pressures that involves, I think I find that quite a daunting challenge. Maybe that's why I'm not doing it. Because even if we aspire to innovate, finding the time and the money to do it well is much easier said than done. So what can we do to make innovation that bit easier and less risky? And I want to suggest a couple of ideas. Firstly, get help where you can. And I'm going to park that one and come back to it later. But secondly, at Innovate UK, we think there's real benefit in using a human-centered design approach to reduce innovation risk. And I'll try and explain why. When time and money is in short supply, you need to make sure that any investments you do make in innovation have the best possible chance of success. We can't completely de-risk innovation, but there are things that we can do to better understand and manage those risks. And in our experience, the businesses that we support often have an excellent grasp of the technical risks associated with new product development. They understand the processes and the skills they need to manage those risks, but they're often less aware of the risks associated with human behaviour and how to address those. And that's a real concern, because perhaps the biggest risk of all, as Dan just alluded to, is actually getting your idea to market, having solved all the technical challenges and spent lots of money along the way, only to discover then that no one wants it. Maybe it solved the wrong problem, or the solution wasn't fit for purpose. Perhaps the benefits weren't obvious to customers, or it was just too difficult or frustrating to use. Technology can make new ideas possible, but only people can make them successful. So good innovation outcomes are more likely if businesses have a better understanding of the problem they're trying to solve through the eyes of the people it affects, and if they allow that understanding to inform their ideas and their decision-making processes. So design provides a human-centered approach, a tool set, and the professional skills needed to help companies do those things. And at Innovate UK, we've recently published a new design and innovation strategy, which explains in more detail what we mean by design, why we think it's so important, and how we plan to help businesses do it better. Great design has proven benefits for business, but it's also in our interests as an investor to encourage its broader uptake. We're investing taxpayers' money, so we want the ideas we support to have the best possible chance of success. And if those ideas have been informed by a rigorous human-centered design approach, we think that's much more likely. So we don't have time today to go into all the details of the design process, although I think Dan's presentation and the work that Jeremy was talking about give you an insight into what that looks like in practice and the benefits it brings. If you are interested to find out more, I recommend having a look at our design strategy, and we'll share some link to that after the event. So very quickly, I wanted to come back to the point about getting help and just highlight a few of the opportunities available through Innovate UK and more broadly. And again, I think we'll share links to these afterwards. So starting with Innovate UK, we run challenge-based grant funding competitions, as well as regular smart grant competitions for ideas in any sector. I had a quick look on our website this morning. I think there are 20 opportunities that are either open now or opening within the next month. The current SMART round, which is for ideas across all sectors, is open for applications until the 26th of May. We also provide innovation and growth advice and coaching under a new sub-brand, Innovate UK Edge. The KTP programme might be of interest to some of the audience. That stands for Knowledge Transfer Partnerships. Those allow you to access new skills by placing a university graduate within your business to work on a specific innovation project. The graduate being employed by the university, we pay 2/3 of the costs and the business contributes 1/3, so it's a really cost-effective way to bring new specialist skills on board. Not to be confused with KTPs, there is also the KTN, Knowledge Transfer Network, a partner organisation of ours. They can help to connect you with businesses, potential partners, funders, and customers across all sectors. They run regular events bringing together diverse business audiences around specific themes. And they also have an excellent tool called the Innovation Canvas, an interactive online tool, and I recommend having a play with that as well. And finally, it's worth checking out R&D tax credits. They're not for everyone, but you might be eligible if you're doing something innovative that involves a significant advance in science or technology. So I think that's my 5 minutes up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. And Rich and other people that are asking, we will send you links to Innovate UK so you can find out where the support's available and the grants available. And I think it was great, Ben, to hear about 20 opportunities that had the word grant in there rather than loans, because I think the headspace for more debt is not really like that big at the moment. Right, Jeremy, I've got a question for you from Dinesh. He said, can you talk around what you talked about in theory, but perhaps put it into an actual live example for him?
Sorry, was this on the?
He doesn't say, but I think if you could, it's quite
On the
a point.
digital, if I digital,
let's go with the digital. Let's go with the digital. And Dinesh, if you're able to be a bit more specific, that would be helpful in the chat box. Then we can go back to Jeremy.
But yes, so on the digital twin, as a good example of this would be, we've been working with financial services institutions to look at understanding their customers. So when bringing on and onboarding a new customer, they need to go through a number of different checks to ensure that those customers are eligible for opening an account, as an example. And by that process can take time. It's very manual historically, and therefore clients are wanting to automate that, speed that up, but also put strong controls around that process itself. So where the digital twin really helps on this is, first of all, we use technology to map those processes So in effect, you're putting a robot into the organization. So everybody who's working on that process carries on with their work. That is then captured into processes. And from that, you're able to do the analysis of why have we got so many variants? Are these relevant variants, etc. And therefore, when you come to designing your new process, your first point is looking at what is the happy path in effect. So from there, you are then able to keep those robots in place so that they are always monitoring the outcome of that process being worked in the real world against the newly designed process. And so from that, you then get that ongoing conformance check so that you can add in any training, or if you see any issues from a fraud perspective, etc. And that virtuous cycle of innovation then can continue through having that digital twin in place. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. And just a bit of a clarification from Rich. Says he's not looking for a grant himself, but because he's conscious of the 6 million SMEs out there probably looking for grants. But it's a question around structure. I don't think that's really a question that we can answer now. But Rich, I think there's what I will do, we'll try and link you up with how we're looking at access to sort of support for SMEs and some of the work the CBI is doing in terms of lobbying on that. I suppose in terms of tax credit, that is probably the sort of most democratic. If you are investing, there's opportunities to get funding back. But we will send you some information on that, and really welcome thoughts and opinions on how we make, as you say, that sort of more accessible to others. Right, Dan, going to come to you for a question. What are the challenges for SMEs using human-centered design for the first time?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. It's a mindset shift, I guess. All the points that Jeremy's made about being able to measure change are super important, and I think some of the tools that you can put in place can enable that. But I think Ben also mentioned that in some respects, many organizations working with end users can be quite siloed from sort of the end use of their products and services, right? So you assume everything's going okay, markets get disrupted, things change in the world around you, people start their practice, like remote working, for instance, like all sorts of stuff that's happened in the last year. We've seen huge change. And if you don't have that sort of feedback loop or the constant communication with your end users and what they're doing with your technology, it can be quite hard to keep that process alive and keep sort of adaptive and agile and able to change. And I think part of the human-centered element that is trickier to get used to is maybe opening up that conversation, all those conversations, to everyone across a business, for instance. You could be 2 people, you could be 15 people, you could be 100 people, but finding ways for people, the experts in their relative fields in your business, to have input into those conversations, and alongside end user conversations, can be really hard to implement when you're a business that hasn't done this before, because it probably goes against a lot of the hierarchical thinking that sort of happens at the moment in traditional businesses. And so I used to work at the Satellite Applications Catapult in the space sector, and we worked with really fledgling businesses and tried to bring design approaches into those organizations. And the first thing was, like, sometimes we'd be having meetings, which was one of the first meetings that company had, where you had people from all levels of the business around the table discussing what was going on with the end customer and how they kept abreast of like what was happening in the company itself. So like, you've got product development over here doing something based on the most recent set of information they've got from someone who deals with the end user quite frequently. But those conversations are happening like once a month or once every 6 months in terms of updates. And there isn't this flow back of like what's working and what isn't to achieve that growth for the business or success in the marketplace. And so those processes being put in place, the different tools, it can be, you have to be quite open and quite vulnerable as a business to go and do that, because the transparency that comes in through those conversations is also not what a lot of companies are used to, right? It's not business as usual. And I think, as Ben mentioned, there are grants and there are other ways of accessing experts to come in and help with these things and sort of cushion the blow that it's going to have on your everyday business processes, because the tools out there and they exist, and the knowledge is out there, it exists, and it can be made much less risky through working with experts in that area. Yeah, it's a big mindset change, but once you embrace it, I think you never look back, because it's like, how did we do this before? You know, because it's having your ears and eyes sort of opened up where previously they might have been a bit removed from the conversation or in the next room. I'm not sure that's massively helpful, sorry, but hopefully
No,
that's
it is, and I think sometimes we do sometimes keep innovation constricted, don't we? But actually, I know it's something that we're doing at the CBI is actually doing a bit of a review of ourselves, and it's encompassing everybody in the organisation, and they're not being asked to come as a representative of their team. They're being asked to come as an individual with a fresh set of eyes to really sort of challenge what we do things and why we do things, because I think you can. It's very easy, isn't it, to stay in your silos, but bring in externals and that critical eye. Dinesh, you made a point in the chat box around putting the opportunities available to Innovate UK, making them, listing them. I think what we'll do is make sure, as for the website, on our website, we'll put hyperlinks through to Innovate UK, so that's in place as well. Perhaps this is one for Dan and Jeremy. Is human-centered design only relevant to those coming up with completely new ideas, or does it also apply to evolution innovation, making sort of small improvements? So how do you apply it? Do you apply it just to the sort of big bang new invention that no one's ever thought about, or is it thinking of doing things slightly differently in different ways of approaching? Jeremy, I might come to you first on that, and then Dan to you next.
Yeah, no, for me, I would absolutely say it's definitely for both. Whether you have a product that is out there already, it is then about how can you better deliver that product or service to your client? How can you make that more efficient within your organization as well? And by bringing the right tools to be able to improve those processes, improve the enablers of servicing that client or delivering a product, will make a massive amount of difference to an organization. And during times of challenge, being able to get to the market in the most efficient way and keeping costs down within your organization actually enables you to innovate further, because it does free up that time as well. So I would say absolutely for both, but you do bring different tools to whether it is a new idea, a new product versus an existing product.
Thank you. Dan, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Jeremy. I mean, like, this is Pisces version 1, right? This is our first product. We're going to make a Pisces version 2. And if we want it to be better, we're going to have to ask our end users how Pisces version 1 did, right? So that's HCD being applied to our end users. But honestly, in the last 8 months, since everything's been going on with lockdown and coronavirus, we've been our own biggest client, right? We've turned that lens internally and used the HCD practices amongst our own team. So when furlough decisions were being made, opened up to the whole company, had a very transparent and very collaborative approach to who's going to go on furlough, why, what does that mean for the company, right? And really keeping that conversation alive and drawing on all sectors of our team. We're only 15, but it helped, right, to know how it would affect people and how we could minimize the impact, but also make the useful steps for the company. And that will happen, as well as Jeremy says, like in terms of optimizing as we scale as a company, right? Do we do better as a business through selling more units? Of course, we're going to try. But can we also lower our overheads by looking at where those points are where we can make an effective change in logistics or internal communication of those processes? Because that's another way to keep or grow value within an existing business, right? So yeah, I think it's absolutely right. Incrementally keep measuring and monitoring things, but when you're really looking at a radical thing you're going to release, finding a way to make sure that it's got the best chance of success and that people actually want it, like Ben mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Dan. The question, well, it's more of a statement, really. Sorry, I've got a dog barking in the background. From Andy. He's talking around advice on overcoming market resistance to innovation would be really helpful. So often in procurement, innovation is killed. Often in procurement, you will have, this it's new and innovative, therefore high risk. It can be one of the ticks in the boxes. Actually, it was interesting. I was on the phone to a multinational yesterday who said that they're really struggling with moving forward on their online sales because there is so much bureaucracy in the company. And actually talking to some of the sort of multinationals, global companies, they very much look at how they can partner with SMEs so they can have that fleet of foot element to their business. Ben, is there anything you've got or where you've seen companies sort of get over that sort of innovation killing, being killed by procurement processes, or how both from perhaps the larger firm that might be doing that, or the government and your procurement processes, or actually SMEs when they're trying to crack in and win contracts and bids?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think it goes to the heart of the decision-making processes and how people are actually making those decisions. I mean, I think this is where, again, the voice of the customer, which is kind of a recurring theme in this session, becomes really important. That a good a good quote that I heard a colleague of mine in the design industry said he liked to start every project with a conversation about how decisions were going to be made and who within an organization makes those decisions and what criteria that they use. And he said that it's often the hippo, the highest paid person in the room, that makes the decisions, and it's based on nothing more than what they think is the right thing to do. And you really need to get past that. So whether it's government procurement, or whether it's procurement within larger organizations within a supply chain, I think the voice of the customer needs to be much more important in that process. And to me, that's something you can always fall back on. You're always starting from a slightly weaker position if your argument is just, well, we think this is the right thing to do. But if you can present people with tangible evidence that actually, no, we've been and we've spoken to people, we've observed the people that we're actually innovating for, this is what they want, this is what they need, and you can kind of point, and you almost want to be at the point where you can say, you can point at any particular aspect of your product or your service and say, the reason it exists like this and not in any other way is because, then refer back to something that you actually heard a customer say, for example, and you can't argue with that.
Thank you, Ben. And I think as well, if you're talking, Andy, in terms of the government, and sometimes the government can be quite risk averse in terms of its how it procures. There is the government white paper at the moment, so we'll put a link to that, because that's through consultation at the moment. So Simon, if you could just, Simon's listening and making notes and making sure everything happens behind the scenes. If you could make sure we do that link to Joshua's work in procurement, that would be great. Very quickly, we've got a question for you, Ben, directly from Michael. We have a product in development that has been funded internally up till now. We're going to be able to submit. Are we able to submit our ongoing product development to the SMART grant opportunity currently open?
It's quite hard to give a definite answer without having much more information on exactly where you are in the process and what the project involves. The best advice I can give, and sorry it's not much more help, is just to say have a read of the guidance notes. We try and make the guidance notes for the competition as clear as possible in terms of what's within scope and what's not. If you can't find the answer there, then we do have an excellent customer service team that will get back to you within 24 or 48 hours with an answer. So you can always put a question through to them.
Great. Okay, Michael, and we'll follow up with that directly with you as well, to make sure that happens. Right, I'm just conscious we've only got a couple of minutes, and I'm going to be a bit naughty and do chair's dibs on something that actually we're just wanting a bit of advice on at the moment. There's also a couple of people, Thomas, Jane, thank you so much. You've sent your contact details through because of advice that you're giving in terms of innovation, which we'll very much pass on to Ben for him to be able to make sure he's aware of your companies. So a very quick question. So if I could get everyone who's on the call to be near to get ready for a chat box entry, and this is horribly unscientific, not innovation at all. This is proper finger in your ass stuff. But there's quite a lot of mood in the press at the moment around using vaccine and testing passports for domestic use. So not international travel, but things like shops, restaurants, and live events. Just want to get a bit of mood from people on this call. If you're enthusiastic about it, can you put A into the chat box? If you're enthusiastic about it and you think you would actively consider it for your business. B, if you think it's a nice idea in theory, but it has legal and reputational minefield, so do you know what, you're just a little bit, And C, don't like the idea at all. So thinking about passports, A, I'm super enthusiastic because do you know what, it means I can go to Glastonbury. B, nice idea, but do you know what, it's a bit of a minefield. Or C, don't like it, bad idea. That would be really helpful, and we'll get some of those thoughts together and send them through. Thank you, everyone. You're putting them in, and that's brilliant. Really, really helpful. Just in terms of Jack as well. Thank you. We'll also pass on your contact details. So yeah, anyone, if you're able to still pop through your A's or C's, that'd be great. We've got quite a few answers coming through. Right, everyone, I'm going to wrap things up now. I'm going to thank Dan, Jeremy and Ben for speaking. We will do a follow-up to this, which will have the recording of this session. We will also we'll also make sure we get you the links to Ben, and especially the grant opportunities available, and the questions where people can go for questions and support. And we will look forward to seeing you on the 18th of March for the next SME webinar, where we're going to be joined by Anthony Gruper from Marsh Commercial, and where he's going to be talking around leadership and the sort of 6 degrees of leadership. So that should be a really interesting session. He's quite an esteemed author as well as running Marsh. So do tune in for that. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to our speakers, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.